Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our session today on the upcoming EU drug and device legislation. First, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Zsolt Kocsis. I'm country head Hungary at Cromos Pharma. I have more than 13 years of clinical research experience. Prior to joining Cromos Pharma 3 years ago, I've been working for pharmaceutical companies and clinical research organizations in the clinical research field. I hold a medical degree and also a master's degree in business administration. Let's look at the new EU clinical trial regulation. First, let's put this into context. Where we are and where we have been before and where we are going to. Before 2004, there were no harmonized procedures for clinical trial legislations and applications and authorizations. This obviously resulted in delays and complications throughout the EU for clinical research. In 2001, the new clinical trial directive has been accepted, and in 2004, these new rules have been implemented into each national legislations. This, at one side, was successful in terms of harmonization of many aspects. Still, there were many concerns because each country implemented this at their own way. The new regulation, which was published in 2014, is, however, making the next step towards the harmonization. It will be applicable 6 months after the so-called clinical trial information system, a new online portal, will be fully functional. And initially this was accepted or planned to be developed by 2017, but unfortunately due to some technical issues, the process have been delayed. And now we are in a lucky situation that soon this will be released. Currently it's audited, and we will also talk about the transitional arrangements to see when it will be finally in place. So the current system is the directive, and it is implemented into the national laws of the member states. This is how we work now in the EU. The new system is the regulation, which will be directly applicable for each member state. The objectives of this new regulation are to protect the rights, safety, and well-being of the trial participants, to foster further innovation and simplify the procedures of clinical trial applications, especially in multi-state clinical trials. One of its key goals are also to increase transparency and keeping a balance between protecting public health and also the innovation capacity of European medical research, while also recognizing the legitimate economic interests of the sponsors. So to summarize, the overall objective is to make the EU more attractive for research and development. The scope of the regulation has not changed too much as compared to the clinical trial directive. However, there is a new category implemented for low intervention clinical trials. So where this is used, when the investigational medicinal products are already authorized, or the IMP is not yet used in the accordance with the terms of the marketing authorization, then there is supporting evidence, scientific evidence, that the safety and efficacy is justified in that trial, and there is minimal additional risk or burden to the safety of the subjects compared to normal clinical practice. So in addition to the interventional clinical trials in medicinal products for human use, this is a new category which is being implemented here. And what is not in scope, it is not in non-interventional trials and trials without medicinal products like devices and surgery. What are the key changes? There will be one single e-submission to all member states concerned via a new EU portal, which will also be accessible to the member states' national competent authorities and ethics committees. There will be one harmonized dossier for all member states. All documents will be the same which need to be submitted, same list of documents. There will be a coordinated assessment between reporting member states and the member states concerned. So there will be one single decision per member state concerned, no separate decisions, opinions in one state. And there will be also a so-called tacit decision moving forward, just like in the directive. This idea also goes for this option also moves forward. So the timelines have to be kept, and this ensures this as well. So again, the new regulation is introducing the risk-adapted approach for clinical trials where there is a minimal risk to the patients. It's also increasing transparency for the clinical trials and their outcomes. It is simplifying the safety reporting requirements and reinforcing the supervision of clinical trials by the EMA, the authorities, and the member states in third countries. There are also provisions here that clinical trials conducted outside the EU, but referred to in a clinical trial application within the EU, will need to meet those requirements, at least those requirements which are in the EU regulation. So it is very important to prepare for that only those clinical trial data will be accepted in the EU for clinical trial application, and of course, marketing authorization, which were conducted according to these high standards. The new regulation is also introducing the concept of co-sponsorship, and for the informed consent, it provides broader provisions. For instance, broad consent, where the trial participant can also give consent to use their data outside of the given protocol. There are also some new requirements, or more clarified requirements, I would say, for minors, incapacitated subjects, breastfeeding, and pregnant women, trials conducting in emergency situation, vulnerable group populations. Also, some compensation system have to be set up by the member states, and this will be evaluated. Also, the authorities, the national authorities, will have to identify a national contact point for the clinical trial reasons. Also, the regulation states that the member states can, of course, get a fee for their evaluation. This was also practiced before, but now it is expressly stated in the regulation. And there are also provisions that the sponsor have to archive the trial master file for 25 years. Let's see the timelines of the clinical trial authorization procedure. After the submission, there will be a 10 days maximum for the package validation, and then parallel procedures start, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is a coordinated, let's say, regulatory assessment, where the benefit risk ratio of the study, the manufacturing and labeling, investigators brochure, let's call CMC data, are evaluated. Part 2 is called the national evaluation, which we could also say that this is kind of an ethical evaluation, ethical review. So here the informed consent, subject recruitment, data protection, reward, subject compensation, investigator suitability, damage compensation. So that kind of information for a study, which are obviously a national competence, will be evaluated in this part 2. And again, part 1 and part 2 goes parallel. What about the timelines? You can see the validation was 10 days, and for part 1 and part 2, it is a 45-day timeline if there are no questions. If there are, however, questions, then the applicant, the sponsor, have an additional 35 days to satisfactorily address those questions to the authorities. And then if there are positive decisions or their decisions has been made, within 5 days, the applicant is notified of the result through the EU portal. The reporting member state can also be proposed by the sponsor, by the applicant. However, it is not mandatory to choose that member state by the authority. So this is kind of a discussion between the member states concerned who will be the leading member state during the evaluation. There is also a possibility, however, to disagree with part one conclusions. Again, this is the centralized review of the regulatory dossier. So in cases where the treatment may be inferior in some countries, or in some countries a clinical trial with such a medicinal product would be forbidden, or there are other concerns regarding patient subject safety, or other local concerns, then this should not be, or it's not mandatory to accept this decision, and the national part two evaluation can be negative and finally be rejected, the study be rejected in one member state, while also could be approved in another. It is also some kind of interesting point that the member states can also decide who will participate in part one and part two evaluations. So the competent authority members and the ethics committee members may be involved in both. The ethics committee's role, however, should still comply, of course, to GCP. So the layperson requirement and additional GCP requirements on ethics committee are still in place, of course. How a refusal looks like, again, we discussed this the slide before, that part one or part two or both may be negative. And so the national ethics committees may have some negative opinion in that member state. And in that case, that country will not be able to participate in the study. There's also an additional concept implemented in the regulation, which is the expiration of the clinical trial authorization. So in case no subjects are included within a country in the particular study within 2 years, then that approval, that authorization expired for that country, and it should be reapplied. So what are the key changes according to the current directive, and what is the new regulation? Currently, there are multiple submissions for one trial, and dossiers are not harmonized within across the countries. And in the new system, there will be one single electronic submission to all member states concerned in the particular study. And this will be evaluated in one round, in parallel in one round. Currently, according to the directive, in several countries there are double submissions to the competent authorities, to the ethics committees, and there are no IT collaboration between the member states who the sponsor or the applicant have submitted the study. In the new system, there will be joint assessment for part one. So the regulatory assessment will be done in one round again, facilitated by this collaboration tool, clinical trial information system. Currently, in many countries, EU countries, there are no single member state decisions, but separate competent authority and ethics. In the new system, there will be one single member state decision in each EU country. Currently, also the authority has additional burden with this system because they have to upload information to the EUDAMED database. In the new system, this will be also resolved because this is kind of a distributed system. Many users, stakeholders have direct access to it, and everyone will upload their particular respective data to the system themselves. In the current system, there are limited availability of clinical research data, and the new system ensures that all clinical trial-related information, with only very few exemptions, will be publicly available. There is a so-called transition period with the implementation of the new system, and it will start when the regulation will become applicable. And we expect that this will be December 2021. The first year after the regulation becomes applicable, the applicants, the sponsors can submit OSWE either under the directive or according to the new regulation. In year 2 and 3, however, these clinical trials will be going in the old system. In this year 2 and 3, only the applications can only be submitted in the new system. And there is also an end of legacy where all clinical trials, even if they started in the first year according to the directive and still ongoing after 3 years of being applicable, the regulation, these will also shift to the new regulation system. So the new clinical trial information system has many parts, I would say. There is an EU portal and database, which is, again, the single data entry point for the e-dossiers. This is a workspace and a collaboration tool for coordinated assessments by the authorities. Also, this ensures the supervision at the EU level, and this also provides the information for those which will be publicly available to the general public. There is also one safety reporting database, which is kind of an upgrade to the EUDAMED system, and this is for reporting SUSARs and also for providing a repository for the annual safety reports. And there is also some kind of link, of course, needed because the legacy data, which is currently available in the EUDAMED system, should go into the new one. So there is also such system which will ensure the transition between the two systems. I will not go into too much details of this slide because this is a very heavy slide, as you can see, but I would like to make some key highlights on this. In the center of the slide, you can see the sponsor, the member states, general public, the EMA, the applicant, the commission. So main point again that this is a distributed system and each key stakeholder have direct access to the system itself. So the sponsors will submit their application through the system. They will upload the documentation, they will initiate the submission process. They will also submit the amendments, the notifications here, and finally, at the end of the study, also the clinical study report. The member states are also accessing this system, the documents which were uploaded by the sponsors and the applicants. They will review the documents here. They will communicate with the sponsors and the applicants through the system, and they are tracking all processes, all steps here. And I would like to highlight the general public access. So it is very important that all information, or almost all information which are entered into the system, will be also made publicly available to the general public. There are some exemptions. We will come back to this later on during the presentation. So why is this transparency and what is the background of this? So the EU want to make a system where they make this database publicly accessible by default, which means that in case there is there's no legal conflicts, all data will be made public. So what can be these exemptions? For instance, protection of personal data, protection of commercially confidential information of the sponsor, protecting confidential communications between the member states in relation to the assessment reports, and also to ensure effective supervision of the conduct of clinical member states. So such kind of information obviously will not be made public. However, we should also know that only applications on which the decision has already been made will be made public. And again, all documents with a few exceptions will be public at the first opportunity. So as soon as possible. Sponsors can have a right to make some documents with a delay in publication, but it have to be justified. What are the published data? The clinical trial protocol details, for instance, will be made public. So the product details, some sections in IMPD, IB, will be made public. Also contact details of the sponsor, of the site, the clinical trial summary, very important, reports, start of the trial, end of the trial. Such information will be made available, accessible to the general public. And one key update also that the member state inspection reports will also be published here. What are the objectives to make this public? Why this is needed? There were several times questions whether a trial, whether there is a trial in which some people could participate, and whether what was the outcome of the trials someone has participated earlier, and which were the trial results on which basis marketing authorization has been granted for a product. And by the way, what is known about the product that someone is taking on a prescription, for instance. So all these questions are addressed by making information publicly available on clinical trials. On the other side, again, a balanced approach is needed here because from one side, the authorities have to respect the patients' and doctors' needs and their requirements to get data public. On the other side, the developers and the researchers, of course, have to protect their investments. So the authority is aiming to have this balanced approach with making data publicly available. So what are the key takeaways for the clinical trial regulation? First of all, harmonization. Again, this is one next step towards harmonization of the clinical trial authorization procedures within the EU member states. One single submission for authorization and one decision per country. Again, also the member state collaboration is very important here. We also expect that it will facilitate quick and standardized, harmonized assessment of clinical research in the community moving forward. IT maintenance, this is, it depends. As you can see, the implementation of the system was dependent upon the availability of this IT system, and which is finally in a final stage of being implemented. So it is very important that it will be centrally maintained and updated. And again, the making the data public on medicines, we expect that will generate trust because information will be available on these. Will also build confidence because people will understand what is happening in clinical research and how medicines are tested and approved. And it will also empower knowledge, and it will enable decision making moving forward in medicines. Let's look at the EU medical device regulations. The new regulations on medical devices were published in the official journal of the European Union in 2017. These are actually two regulations. One is on the medical devices and the other on the in vitro diagnostic medical devices. What are the aims of these new regulations? Actually, the core aim is to further improve and increase patient safety. And accordingly, there were many changes implemented in these regulations. First of all, there are increased requirements for the qualification of the test center personnel, and also complete traceability of medical devices with the aid of clear labeling is being implemented. Also, the definition of medical devices have been extended, and some devices which were earlier not considered medical devices, and according to the prior guidelines and laws, now are to be considered medical devices and treated accordingly and approved accordingly. There are also increased requirements for the proof of clinical efficacy of products and registration of the products in the central European database for medical devices, which is the EUDAMED database. There is also a tightening of the requirements for market surveillance. So there is a shift from pre-approval to life cycle approach. And these harmonization efforts between the member states, like the implementation of a medical device coordination group, So as you can see, these are really very similar to those of the clinical trial regulation. Let's talk a bit about the EUDAMED, the new EUDAMED database. Actually, these have many modules, many interfaces. I just want to go into one two key highlights here, that also for this system, the sponsors, the device producer companies will have access to. They have to register their products. They will get a unique device identifier number in the system, and also the notified bodies who have to be involved in some cases in device authorizations can have access to this system, will have access. The post-marketing, the surveillance information will be uploaded and available through this system. And also the clinical investigations, which I would say increasingly will be necessary for medical devices moving forward, will be running through this system. About the classification of the medical devices, we can say that these classification systems have already been in place earlier of the new regulations. However, as mentioned, some devices categories have been added to these classifications, and some devices have been reassessed and reclassified to higher risk category. So it is very important that each drug manufacturer, each device manufacturer will check these classifications, and in some cases, notified body approval will also be required, and in some cases, extended clinical research, clinical trials will be needed to substantiate the authorization of these devices. About the implementation plan, I will not go again here too much details here, just like to highlight that last year, May 2020, the medical device regulation should have been implemented, but due to COVID, this was delayed. For the immaterial diagnostic medical devices, the implementation target is May 2022. And for both, there is some kind of transitioning period when devices can still run according to the old classification, old authorization procedure. However, after a couple of years, all devices will need to meet the requirements of the regulations. And this is again just a final slide of myself on the application of the MDR, which was postponed due to COVID-19 to 2021. So we expect that May 2021 this year, the new medical device regulation will be in application. And this concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. So I'm opening up the session for questions.